Picture this, 1957, Eisenhower's in the White House, Elvis is shaking up the music scene, and America's riding high on the greatest economic boom the world has ever seen. Families are packing up and heading to the suburbs in droves, and they need wheels, big wheels, to haul kids, groceries, and the American dream itself. Ford sold 1,522,406 cars during the 1957 model year, while Chevrolet sold 1,515,177. That's a difference of just 7,200 cars. For the first time since 1935, Ford had beaten Chevrolet in the sales race. It was the automotive equivalent of David toppling Goliath, and nobody saw it coming. But here's what makes this story particularly fascinating. While Ford set records, selling 321,170 wagons in 1957, with 27,690 of those being Country Squires, the 57 Chevy went on to become one of the most iconic American cars ever built. The Ford? Well, it's largely forgotten, a footnote in automotive history, despite outselling its famous rival. The year 1957 marked the peak of the post-war baby boom, with the birth rate standing at a whopping 25.3 births per 1,000 people. Young families were moving to newly built Levitt towns across the country, and they needed practical transportation that didn't sacrifice style. The Country Squire promised to deliver both, wrapped in simulated wood paneling that evoked memories of the classic woodies without the maintenance headaches. This is the story of a vehicle that helped Ford achieve the impossible, yet somehow ended up in the shadow of its competitors. We're going to dig into why the 1957 Country Squire mattered, what made it special, and why you might want to reconsider this overlooked piece of American automotive history. Section 1. The Battle That Changed Detroit. The 1950s were characterized by minimal inflation, low unemployment rates, and high consumerism, a stark contrast from the unstable and turbulent war years prior. Between 1945 and 1960, the United States gross national product leaped from $200 billion to a whopping $500 billion. Ford went into 1957 with a completely redesigned lineup. For 1957, the Country Squire was based on an all-new chassis to accommodate a lower floor. The chassis was a split wheelbase platform. The 118-inch wheelbase was exclusive to the Fairlane, with Ford station wagons sharing a 116-inch wheelbase with the Ford Custom. This wasn't just a facelift, it was a complete reimagining. In line with other American manufacturers, a central part of the redesign was lower body height, requiring an all-new chassis. The result was a wagon that looked sleeker, more modern, and frankly more expensive than it actually was. Meanwhile, Chevrolet was working with what was essentially a 3-year-old design. The main cause of the sales shift to Ford was that the 1957 Chevrolet had tubeless tires, the first car to have them. This scared away sales to Ford as many people did not initially trust the new tubeless design. Americans in the 50s were pragmatic folks. They'd lived through the Depression and a World War. When it came to new technology, they wanted proof it worked before they'd spend their hard-earned dollars. As it turned out, the 57 Ford allowed the company to overtake Chevrolet in sales for the first time since 1935 and was crowned America's best-selling vehicle. Quite a pivotal moment for the Blue Oval. The Country Squire sat at the top of Ford's Wagon lineup, and in 1957 that meant something. The listed retail price was $2,556. In today's money, that's roughly $28,600, not cheap for a family hauler, but positioned perfectly for the growing middle class. Section 2. Engineering and Performance. Let's talk about what made the Country Squire tick. For 1957, the Country Squire carried over all 3 engines from the 1956 model year with revised power outputs. A 144 horsepower, 223 cubic inch mileage maker inline 6 was the standard engine. The 292 cubic inch V8 returned with a 2-barrel carburetor producing 212 horsepower. But here's where it gets interesting for the performance-minded buyer. 3 versions of the 312 cubic inch V8 were offered: 245 horsepower with a 4-barrel carburetor, 270 horsepower with dual 4-barrel carburetors, and 300 horsepower with dual 4-barrel carburetors and a supercharger. Think about that for a moment. You could walk into a Ford dealer in 1957 and order a family station wagon, a vehicle designed to haul kids and groceries, with a supercharged V8 producing 300 horsepower. That's not a typo. A supercharged station wagon. In 1957, the chassis engineering was genuinely innovative. To allow for a lower floor, the frame layout changed from a truck-style ladder frame to a perimeter frame. This might sound like technical jargon, but it mattered. A perimeter frame allowed the floor to sit between the frame rails instead of above them, which meant passengers sat lower in the car. Lower seating meant a lower roofline, which meant better aerodynamics and a more modern appearance. Coinciding with the use of a lower body and interior floor, the 4th generation was wider than its predecessor, increasing from 8 passenger seating to 9 for the first time. That 3rd row wasn't just a pair of jump seats facing sideways like in some competitors. It was a forward-facing bench that could actually accommodate 3 adults. Well, 3 adults who were friendly with each other anyway. Section 3. Design and innovation. The styling of the 57 Ford borrowed heavily from the Thunderbird, and it showed. Along with Ford sedans, the Country Squire adopted several design elements of the 1957 Ford Thunderbird, including its wraparound windshield, restyled with a forward slanted A-pillar, short tail fins, and large round tail lamps. Those wraparound windshields were everywhere in the 50s, but Ford's execution was particularly dramatic. The A-pillar, that's the post between the windshield and the front door, angled forward instead of back. It sounds like a small detail, but it gave the wagon a sense of forward motion even when it was standing still. The wood paneling deserves special attention. By 1957, nobody was using real wood anymore, not even the Country Squire. What you got was simulated wood grain applied as vinyl appliques over steel bodywork. The only station wagon with standard equipment wood paneling of any type from 1954 to 1956, the Country Squire was joined by the Mercury Colony Park in 1957 and briefly with the Edsel Bermuda in 1958. Ford made several practical improvements that year. To further expand load capacity, the folding mechanism of the middle seat was redesigned, allowing for a completely flat load floor when stowed. The rear seat still had to be removed. To improve loading, the top half of the liftgate was widened, extending into the D-pillars. This matters more than it might seem. Previous wagons required you to maneuver cargo around seat frames and brackets. With the new design, you could fold the middle seat flat and suddenly have a cargo area that rivaled a small pickup truck. For families moving to the suburbs, this was hugely practical. Section 4. The Suburban Connection. The baby boom and the suburban boom went hand in hand. Almost as soon as World War II ended, developers such as William Levitt began to buy land on the outskirts of cities and use mass production techniques to build modest, inexpensive tract houses there. The Country Squire became the 4-wheeled symbol of this movement. The 1957 Ford Country Squire was not just a car, it was a symbol of suburban American life during the post-war boom. At a time when America was embracing the open road, the Country Squire offered a blend of practicality and panache that few other vehicles could match. The GI Bill subsidized low-cost mortgages for many returning soldiers, which meant that it was often cheaper to buy one of these suburban houses than it was to rent an apartment in the city. These houses were perfect for young families. They had informal family rooms, open floor plans and backyards. And what did these families need? A vehicle that could handle little league practice, grocery runs to the new supermarkets, and weekend trips to grandma's house 3 states over. Motor fuel consumption rose from some 22 million gallons in 1945 to around 59 million gallons in 1958. Americans were driving more than ever before, and wagons like the Country Squire made it possible. When Ford introduced the steel-bodied Country Squire station wagon, initially with wooden body-side trim and then with imitation woodwork decorating its flanks, it became an instant status symbol with baby boomers and their growing young families. The wood paneling wasn't just decoration, it was a statement. It said, "We're doing well enough to afford the premium wagon, and we're sophisticated enough to appreciate the classic aesthetic." It evoked memories of estate wagons at country clubs, even if your estate was a 3-bedroom ranch in Levittown. Section 5. Competition and context. Let's address the elephant in the room. Why does everyone remember the 57 Chevy, but not the 57 Ford? The 1957 Ford, with the exception of the rare retractable hardtop model, is not nearly as prized by collectors today as the 1957 Chevrolet. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, the 1957 Chevrolet was a popular used car and highly prized street machine. Here's the thing, Ford built a better car in 57, but Chevrolet built a better icon. The 57 Chevy had that perfect combination of styling and timing. It was the last year of the shoebox design before Chevrolet went bigger and heavier. It became the poster child for 50s nostalgia. The Country Squire faced competition from Chevrolet's Nomad and 210 wagons, Plymouth's suburban offerings, and eventually Mercury's Colony Park. In a major shift, for 1957, Ford station wagons no longer shared a body with a Mercury counterpart. Instead, the body was developed for the Edsel line of station wagons, with the Country Squire becoming the counterpart of the Edsel Bermuda. This corporate shuffling might seem like inside baseball, but it mattered. By developing the wagon body for the ill-fated Edsel program, Ford was hedging its bets. When the Edsel bombed, the Country Squire carried on, proving that good engineering can outlast marketing disasters. Section 6. Market reality and cultural impact. When Ford's sales surpassed GM's figures in 1957, Country Squire sales exceeded 27,000 vehicles, setting a record that would stand until 1965. Those numbers tell an interesting story. Ford built fewer than 30,000 Country Squires in a year when they produced over 1.5 million cars total. The Country Squire was a specialty vehicle, the top-tier offering in the wagon lineup. Most buyers went for the cheaper ranch wagon or country sedan models that didn't have the wood paneling. The Ford Country Squire positioned itself as a premium full-size station wagon, tailored for affluent families seeking a blend of luxury and practicality in the post-World War II era. This model became an enduring cultural icon of mid-20th century American suburbia, embodying the era's ideals of family affluence and mobility. The Country Squire appeared in countless family photos, television shows, and movies depicting American life in the 50s and 60s. Despite Ford's perennial second banana sales status, its wagons ruled, meaning that if you drive one today, nearly everyone you encounter will be transported back to their wonder years. Either their parents had one, or they rode in one to Cub Scouts or baseball practice. Think about that cultural impact. Even though Chevrolet usually outsold Ford, Ford owned the wagon market. If you grew up in the 50s or 60s and rode in a station wagon, chances are it had a blue oval on the grille. Section 7. The collector market reality. Here's where things get particularly interesting for those of us who appreciate automotive history and value. The highest recorded sale was $68,200 for a 1957 Ford Country Squire wagon. The lowest recorded sale price was $29,700 for a 1957 Ford Country Squire wagon. Let me put that in perspective. A nicely restored 57 Chevy Bel Air convertible will set you back well over $100,000, often much more. A 57 Country Squire in similar condition, you're looking at $30,000 to $70,000 depending on specifications and condition. Today, the 1957 Ford Country Squire holds a special place in collectors' hearts. While production numbers were substantial at the time, surviving examples in good condition are becoming increasingly rare. Values can vary widely based on condition and originality, but expect to see figures anywhere from $20,000 to well over $100,000 for pristine or rare models. The market recognizes a few things that drive value. First, originality matters. A Country Squire with its original wood grain appliques in good condition is worth considerably more than one that's been restored with incorrect materials. Second, options matter. A supercharged 312 cubic inch V8 car with air conditioning and power, everything will command premium pricing. What's particularly interesting is the trend line. Country Squires from the 50s have a happy days vibe, while the over-styled 1970s Leviathans are a perhaps not-so-happy trip back to the Malaise era. The 60s are the prime hunting ground, as those wagons are old enough to be cool, yet modern enough to be freeway-worthy. The 57 sits right at the beginning of this golden era. It's new enough to have modern conveniences like power steering and automatic transmission, but old enough to have that distinctive 50s character that later models traded away. Section 8. What went wrong? So why isn't the 1957 Country Squire more celebrated? Why did it end up as a footnote when it should have been a headline? Part of it was timing. Ford's aggressive efforts to retake the top-selling crown from Chevrolet reached a crescendo in the 1957 model year when it outproduced its rival by more than 170,000 units. Ford's main advantage was a new body with lower, longer, wider styling. But then came 1958. Production of 1958 Ford models dropped to just 967,954 units. Chevrolet handily regained the sales title, even though the recession helped drive its sales down to just 1.2 million units. The 1958 recession hit America hard, and new car sales plummeted. Ford's momentum from 57 evaporated almost overnight. More importantly, the redesigned 58 Ford was universally panned. The clean lines of the 57 gave way to overstyled chrome excess that felt dated almost immediately. Ford may very well have had more leftover 1957s to sell when the 1958 models debuted. That could have hurt sales of the 1958 models, even though they were improved in key ways over the 1957 Fords. There's also the quality issue. Motor Trend felt the 1957 Ford's build quality was startlingly bad and cautioned readers to check any new Ford carefully for assembly quality before making a purchase. In the rush to beat Chevrolet, Ford may have sacrificed quality control. That reputation took years to overcome. Section 9. The engineering legacy. Despite its commercial fate, the Country Squire's engineering innovations had lasting impact. The perimeter frame allowed the floor pan to sit between the frame rails instead of above them, a configuration used until the 2011 discontinuation of the Ford Crown Victoria. That's remarkable. An engineering solution developed for the 1957 station wagon was still in use 54 years later. The perimeter frame became the standard for American body-on-frame vehicles, eventually spreading to trucks and SUVs. The focus on interior flexibility also set precedents. To improve loading, the top half of the liftgate was widened, extending into the D-pillars. Modern SUVs with their wide-opening tailgates and fold-flat seating owe a debt to innovations like these. Even the simulated wood paneling had an impact. Its use of faux wood paneling became a cultural icon, influencing the design of station wagons for years to come. Love it or hate it, that woodgrain look defined American wagons for 3 decades. You can draw a direct line from the '57 Country Squire to the Jeep Grand Wagoneer of the '80s. Section 10 for the modern enthusiast. So what does all this mean if you're considering a 1957 Country Squire today? First, understand what you're getting into. These are large, heavy vehicles with 50-year-old engineering. The Country Squire drives like a classic American car, with one-finger steering, a torquey, if breathless engine, and a floaty suspension that also manages to send a rattling shudder through the body at every bump. That's not a criticism, it's the authentic experience. If you want modern handling and refinement, buy a modern vehicle. If you want to experience how Americans actually drove in the '50s, this is it. Parts availability is surprisingly good for common mechanical components. The Y-block V8 engines share parts with Thunderbirds and F-Series trucks. Brake parts, suspension components and the like are still available from specialty suppliers. The challenging parts are the Country Squire-specific trim pieces, particularly the woodgrain appliques. From an investment perspective, the Country Squire occupies an interesting niche. It's not appreciating at the rate of more popular '50s classics, which means there's still room for growth. More importantly, it's usable. You can actually take a well-sorted Country Squire on road trips, to car shows, or just to cruise around town without feeling like you're driving a museum piece. The practical advantages shouldn't be overlooked either. That massive cargo area means you can actually use this vehicle for hauling antiques, lumber for a project, camping gear for a weekend trip. Try doing that with a '57 Corvette. The 1957 Ford Country Squire represents something we don't often talk about in automotive history. The forgotten winner. Ford beat Chevrolet for the first time in more than 2 decades. The Country Squire set sales records for premium wagons. The engineering was genuinely innovative, with solutions that remained relevant for decades. And yet, ask a car enthusiast about 1957 and they'll tell you about the Chevy. They'll wax poetic about the Bel Air's tail fins or the Nomad's distinctive styling. The Country Squire, that's the vehicle their parents drove to Little League practice. If they remember it at all, maybe that's exactly why it deserves another look. The Country Squire wasn't trying to be a show-off. It wasn't designed for drag racing or car shows. It was built to haul families through the greatest economic expansion in American history. It was transportation for the American dream, wrapped in simulated wood paneling and powered by engines that ranged from sensible to supercharged. Recent auction results show prices ranging from under $30,000 to nearly $70,000, which makes the Country Squire one of the more accessible pieces of '50s Americana. You can own a piece of the year Ford beat Chevrolet without taking out a second mortgage. I'd love to hear your experiences with the Country Squire or other '50s wagons. Drop a comment below telling us about your family's wagon, or if you're currently restoring one, share your project. These stories matter. They're part of the automotive tapestry that makes this hobby so rewarding. If you found this deep dive into the Country Squire helpful, hit that subscribe button. We're committed to exploring the overlooked corners of automotive history, the vehicles that mattered more than we remember, and the engineering innovations that shaped the cars we drive today. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. It helps us reach more people who appreciate the full spectrum of automotive history, not just the obvious classics everyone talks about. Thank you for watching. Whether you're driving a Country Squire, dreaming of owning one, or just curious about automotive history, I appreciate you spending this time with me. These vehicles tell the story of who we were, and in many ways, who we still are. The Country Squire might not be the most celebrated car of 1957, but it's certainly one of the most interesting, and maybe that's a better legacy than being merely famous. Until next time, keep the shiny side up and the stories alive.